Chapter 91. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Title 4, TAT Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Jean, are you listening to me? Kingsley did not get a response and was a little unhappy. Jean came back to her senses. I heard you. From my standpoint, I think you could fix up the marriage between Fourth Master Swan and Melody, Kingsley said seriously. Do you think I can fix it up? Jean put down the document and casually lit a cigarette. Sometimes, when she was not in a good mood and had a lot of stress, she would want to smoke a cigarette. Smoke less, Kingsley reminded when he heard the sound of a lighter. Jean did not reply him. She took a deep breath and said, What do you think is the main reason why Fourth Master Swan did not agree to be with Melody? Old Master Swan did not agree. That's why matchmaking is a waste of time. Think about it. Back then, when Old Master Swan helped the Sanders family conquer the country, he suddenly chose to give up military power and leave the political arena. I don't know the reason, but at least everyone can see that Old Master Swan really doesn't want to be involved in politics anymore. So now, the Sanders family wants to make the Swan family return through marriage. They even want to control the Swan family. It's originally a matter of self-entertainment. Self-entertainment, Kingsley smiled. You know that you despise the leader of Harkin. Stupid, regardless of the position. Kingsley was speechless. Rather than doing something useful and unrewarding, it's better to do a favor along the way. This time, I've helped Fourth Master Swan a great deal. Maybe I'll still need him in the future, Jean said straightforwardly. You're determined to fight with Melody, aren't you? Just let the Sanders family know how useless those canaries he raised are. Jean sneered. Kingsley was silent. Jean's personality was really the same as her mother's. If it was not for her mother's willful behavior back then, she would not have ended up like this. I originally wanted you to come back to take revenge and start a small business at the same time. Kingsley sighed with a little sadness. Jean was indifferent. In the end, you caused me a lot of trouble. Kingsley was a little helpless. In short, don't let your guard down. After all, it's hard to guard against a hidden arrow. I'm far away. Even if I wanted to help you block the arrow, I wouldn't be able to fly over so soon. Yeah, Jean responded. She did not retort back. Her tone still seemed to be a little emotional. It was rare for Jean to be so obedient in front of him. Kingsley's tears flowed freely, and he was about to speak. Jean did not care and hung up the phone. She was just not used to things that were too emotional. It did not match her current life. She put out her cigarette and was about to call West when she suddenly quivered. She pursed her lips and pressed the landline. Amy, come in for a moment. Yes. Amy knocked on the door and entered. Did Deputy Director Lawrence do anything today? Jean asked. What do you mean by anything? Any abnormal behavior? I don't think so. Amy was a little uncertain. She said, for the whole morning, Deputy Director Lawrence was in his office. He did not even come out of the door. Usually, he'll act like this when he has nothing to do. I heard that he's hiding in the room playing games. Jean was silent for a few seconds. It was impossible for Joshua to let her develop in the Lawrence enterprise. She had already passed the board's decision-making committee's proposal. He would definitely not be so indifferent. No matter what, he should at least go to Alexander Lawrence's office to inquire about it. It was really strange for him to be so calm unless he already knew about her proposal in advance. He could even say that he had already started planning. She raised her eyebrows. Then, has anyone entered or left Deputy Director Lawrence's office? I didn't pay much attention to that, Amy replied. Although I'm outside your and Deputy Director Lawrence's office, sometimes I'm too busy at work to notice that much. Okay, I got it. Jean did not ask further. Get Forrest to prepare and meet West at 2. Yes. Jean looked at Amy's back. She sat in her office chair and thought for a while. She suddenly picked up the draft proposal in front of her. After hesitating for a while, she revised the investment cost. It was just a precautionary action. In any case, whether she wanted to cooperate with MUK or not, and how they cooperated, it was all up to her. What she was doing now was just to prove herself, so that she could establish herself in the Lawrence enterprise in the future. 2 p.m. Jean brought Forrest to the high-class hotel that West was staying at. Forrest was a little nervous. Team leader Jean, isn't it a little too abrupt for just the two of us to meet the president of MUK? Are you sure you don't want to ask the general manager to come along? Don't worry, foreigners don't have so many levels. They'll be happy as long as it's win-win cooperation. Forrest sometimes really felt that team leader Jean had a mature and steady personality that did not match her age. She was very convincing. The two of them stood outside West's room. Then, they knocked on the door. West's assistant opened the door and politely led them into the room. There was another person in the large living room. That person looked at Jean and took the initiative to smile. Jean smiled back politely. At that moment, she had a plan in mind. West stood up from the sofa and was especially warm to Jean. The sun has risen from the west. Are you now willing to come and see me? Godfather, I'm a little busy. What are you busy with? West asked angrily on purpose. I'm busy discussing a collaboration with you, Xiao Qing said straightforwardly. West looked surprised. Could it be that you're also here to talk about e-commerce marketing with me today? Also. Jean frowned. Could it be that someone has already beaten me to it? This gentleman, West introduced, he's the boss of Ascension Technology, Cameron Hall. Hello, Jean. I've heard a lot about you. I'm Cameron Hall. As he spoke, he handed over his business card with incomparable enthusiasm. Jean took it. Hello. I didn't expect to meet Jean here. It's my honor. You flatter me. Jean was neither servile nor overbearing toward Cameron Hall's compliment. She smiled and asked, Cameron is also interested in e-commerce projects. E-commerce is the future development trend. I think not only me but more than half of the enterprises in Southampton City are interested. So, I volunteered myself and brought my proposal to seek cooperation with Mr. West. Cameron Hall admitted generously. Jean smiled without batting an eyelid, expressing her approval. At this moment, West said straightforwardly, my principle is very simple. I'll choose whoever's proposal is more attractive and advantageous to me. Jean, don't blame Godfather for not giving you preferential treatment. Business is business. Jean smiled. Godfather doesn't have to worry. In that case, let's sit down and talk together. Yes. Jean and Cameron sat opposite West. Cameron arrived first. According to the principle of first.come.first.served, Cameron will talk about his cooperation proposal first. Then, I'll respectfully accept this arrangement. Cameron quickly took out his proposal confidently. Jean's eyes moved slightly. What made him so full of confidence? Chapter 92. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A Small Victory Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Noel.n at a luxurious presidential room of a high-class hotel. In the living room, Cameron Hall handed a copy of the proposal to West and left a copy for himself. He said, MUK Group has always been one of the best in the e-commerce world. How can they operate MUK Group better than us? Once we reach an agreement, all the operations of e-commerce will be under your control. These are my thoughts about the cooperation. Next, I want to briefly explain my understanding of e-commerce. In my opinion, the development of e-commerce is a convenient way to satisfy people's daily needs. How to utilize this convenience to the max and how to let users have a better experience would be the key to e-commerce's existence. I personally think, Jean Lawrence listened quietly. Cameron made perfect sense. Other than different wording and logical order of ideas, it was probably the same as her proposal. Jean remained calm. Cameron continued, finally, this is my investment in this collaboration. According to our estimations, my investment for this project is approximately $2 billion. Here's the list of investments. Mr. West, you can take a look. Also, to express my sincerity, I will increase my investment by 5%. I think MUK Group will need a lot of public relations in Harkin. This investment amount is for Mr. West to expand the market in Harkin. West listened to Cameron Hall's proposal and glanced at Jean. Her eyes were filled with satisfaction at the proposal. West probably did not expect that such a small enterprise with no notable achievements would have such an amazing proposal. Other than being surprised, he also felt regretful. He regretted missing out on such a perfect proposal. After all, Jean Lawrence would definitely be the final partner. Jean ignored West's gaze and said to Cameron Hall, I'm really surprised by your company's proposal. I never thought that one day I would be so aligned with a company's proposal. Cameron Hall pretended that he did not understand and said exaggeratedly, you mean our proposal is the same? How can there be such a coincidence? It's true. Jean pulled out her proposal manuscript and handed it to West. She also handed a copy to Cameron Hall. Both of them took a quick glance. West only needed one glance to understand that the original proposal was done by Jean Lawrence and that someone had stolen it. He pretended not to know anything and said, they do look similar. If it wasn't because two of you had given it to me separately, I would have thought that the proposals came from the same person. Actually, it's my first time meeting Mr. Hall today. Great minds think alike. Cameron Hall smiled and said, does that mean our proposal's well done? It is indeed a solid proposal, West affirmed. This is the most satisfactory proposal I have received so far. I don't think there will be a better proposal than this. So, will Mr. West choose one of our proposals? Cameron Hall asked hurriedly. Mr. Hall, aren't you curious how our proposals are so similar? Jean interrupted suddenly. Cameron was stunned. Then, he said calmly, just as Ms. Lawrence said, we had no prior interactions. I don't have any doubts. It's impossible that such a big company like the Lawrence Enterprise had copied the documents of a small company like mine. On the other hand, an insignificant person like me doesn't have the ability to get my hands on Lawrence Enterprise's proposal. Eden Swan had already gone through all the events that might occur prior to the meeting, so Cameron could answer with ease. He had to admit that he really admired Eden. For Eden to be able to think of such a thorough plan at his age, he would definitely have great achievements in business in the future. This was also the reason why he fawned over Eden so much. Other than his family background, he was also different from others in terms of ability and ambition. Jean looked at Cameron calmly. She knew that Cameron had prepared an excuse. If she were to pursue the matter now, it would seem unreasonable and aggressive. After all, Cameron had made it clear that he was only the boss of a small company. How could he possibly get his hands on Lawrence Enterprise's proposal? It was impossible. Chapter 93 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Counter Scheme Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Eden Swan picked up his phone. Joshua Lawrence. Brother.in.law, did it work? Was Jean fuming in anger? I was so excited for the entire afternoon just thinking about it. Joshua's excitement was indescribable when he thought about Jean being chased out of the family. Eden's expression turned ugly at Joshua's excitement. Joshua Lawrence, are you sure you gave me the final proposal? Yes, I gave you the proposal the moment I got it. Didn't you remind me that there might be changes when it goes to the board of directors? You asked me to keep an eye on it, so I asked one of the board members. Jean's proposal was approved by the board of directors, word for word. Including the investment amount. Yes. Joshua was very certain. But right now, Jean's investment amount is $2.2 billion. That's impossible. Joshua Lawrence's expression immediately changed to one in disbelief. It's not impossible if it's the truth. Jean Lawrence has secured the MUK proposal. How could this happen? Joshua could not accept the situation. He raised his voice and said, "Didn't you say that Jean would be kicked out of the Lawrence enterprise after this? You even told her to scram. Enough. If not for the error in the message you sent me, would I have failed?" Eden was furious. "I gave you the final proposal, I swear." Joshua refused to let go. What's the point of swearing? In the end, Jean succeeded, and we were all tricked by her. I knew Jean wasn't dumb. She's a smart woman. You must have let your guard down. It must be your fault, you're blaming me. Joshua Lawrence, know your place. What right do you have to blame me? Eden said in a menacing tone. Joshua was so furious that he could not retort. Let me ask you one last time. Did the board of directors approve more than $2 billion for the investment? I'm sure they did not. Joshua said fiercely. Then Jean must have changed the documents after approval by the board of directors. If it's her own doing, then this proposal will no longer be valid. You mean, as long as we can confirm that the board of directors agreed to only 2 billion yuan instead of 2.2 billion yuan, the proposal would be a failure. Don't get ahead of yourself. From Lawrence Enterprises' point of view, if we can't get an additional 200 million yuan for the proposal, we still wouldn't land the contract. Therefore, we would still need to sign the final contract with MUK for 2.2 billion yuan. Why are you telling me this? Are you trying to make me laugh? Joshua Lawrence, have you really been working at the Lawrence Enterprise for a year? Joshua Lawrence was rendered speechless. What I mean is that Jean changed the investment amount on the proposal without the board of directors' approval. This is considered a violation of the rules. Although she managed to get the contract in the end, her actions were vile. You can use this against her and incite the board of directors to oppose Jean. Otherwise, she would be promoted to marketing director in return for securing the contract. This way, even if we can't make Jean Lawrence leave Lawrence Enterprise, we won't let her have such a high position within the company. Once Jean Lawrence secures her position as marketing director, it'll be even harder for us to oust her. Are we really not going to kick Jean out? Joshua was still unconvinced. Making sure Jean is not the marketing director is the best thing you can do. Eden didn't say anything else and hung up. His eyes turned cold. Jean Lawrence. You got lucky this time. Jean returned to the Lawrence Enterprise. As soon as she entered her office, Amy said anxiously, "Team Leader Lawrence, the chairman is looking for you. He asked you to go to his office immediately." Jean was calm in the face of Amy's excitement. She knew why. It was just an additional 200 million yuan. Someone must have informed them beforehand. She responded, "Make me a cup of coffee." Amy looked at her. "I'd like some coffee before I go." "Yes." Amy said and left. She admired Jean's composure that brimmed with confidence. Chapter 94. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A Small Victory Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. She smiled and said, "Since Mr. Hall doesn't want to pursue the matter, I don't think there's a need to." Cameron Hall heaved a sigh of relief. Although he looked confident, he still felt guilty. He was still afraid that Jean Lawrence would cause a ruckus and that he would make a mistake. Luckily, Eden Swan was smart enough to know that Jean would definitely not fall out with him in public. If she did, she would only leave a bad impression on MUK. Jean Lawrence was smart enough to tolerate it. Otherwise, MUK wouldn't choose such an unreasonable person to work with. If Jean Lawrence couldn't find anything to use against him, the result would always be a crushing defeat no matter how much of a fuss she made. It was absolutely impossible for Eden Swan to be caught red-handed. Therefore, Cameron would definitely win today's proposal. Thinking up to this point, Cameron Hall's smile became even brighter. With two proposals being so similar, who would Mr. West choose between us? Jean asked West. West looked at the two proposals. I haven't been in Harkin for long, he said. I don't know enough about either of your companies. Of course, I'm not going to judge emotionally on who I'll choose. It's business, after all. That was directed at Jean Lawrence. Jean nodded while Cameron chuckled in secret. However, the proposals from both companies are evenly matched. It's very difficult to make a decision. The only thing that I can judge upon is your investment amount. As such, that will be the key to who I'll choose today, West said solemnly. Cameron became even more excited. Eden Swan had added another 100 million yuan to the original 2 billion yuan proposal to create a gap between the Lawrences' proposal and their company's proposal. Eden was able to hit the nail on the head. He was a formidable man indeed. Cameron would need to work harder to curry favor with him. With that thought in mind, Cameron Hall heard West say solemnly, I choose the Lawrence Enterprise. What? Cameron Hall could not believe it. He thought he had misheard. He was no longer confident. Lawrence Enterprise. West repeated again. Why? Cameron Hall could not remain calm. Mr. West, you just said that this is a business decision, but now you're biased. Isn't this too much? If Mr. West decided on Lawrence Enterprise and Ms. Lawrence, why did you waste everyone's time? You should have announced to the public that this project was reserved for Ms. Lawrence. It's well known that Mr. West and Ms. Lawrence is involved with each other. Aren't you just toying with the other companies? As the person in charge of MUK, is this not tasteless? Why do you think I'm siding with Jean Lawrence? West asked, his face darkening. Cameron Hall angrily picked up Jean's proposal. He had read it casually, so he had not read the details. He flipped to the page with the investment amount and pointed at the number and exclaimed, Lawrence Enterprises' investment amount is 2.2, Cameron Hall was stunned. Wait, 2.2 billion. Wasn't it 2 billion? How is it 2.2 billion? He looked at the number in disbelief. At that moment, Cameron was completely stunned and he could not regain his composure for a long time. Jean sneered. West smiled. Do you have any objections, Mr. Hall? Cameron Hall did not answer for a long time. He was thoroughly embarrassed. West did not wait for his answer. He said, I hereby announce that MUK's E.Commerce partner in Harkin will be Lawrence Enterprise. The Lawrence Enterprise will enjoy MUK's exclusive partnership rights in Harkin. Jean Lawrence smiled. Thank you, Godfather. West held out his hand. Looking forward to working together. Definitely. The two of them had successfully reached an agreement. Meanwhile, Cameron Hall was stuck trying to process the outcome. He was thinking about how he would report this to Eden Swan. Mr. Hall, thank you for your participation. I hope we can work together next time, West said politely. Cameron forced himself to smile. He muttered a few words and left. Jean looked at Cameron Hall's back. She turned to West and said, I won't disturb you anymore, Godfather. I'll go back and prepare our contract. West nodded. With that, Jean left with Forrest Jackson. Chapter 95. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Counter Scheme Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Jean sat in her office chair and took a break. She sipped her coffee and made a phone call. It's rare for you to call me so frequently. Are you in trouble? Kingsley Thorne's voice was light and cheerful as always. It should be midnight for Kingsley due to the time difference, but no matter when she called him, he always seemed to be available. Sometimes, she wonders if he doesn't sleep. She said, "Help me investigate a person called Cameron Hall. He's the boss of Ascension Technology. Find out if he's related to Eden Swan. There's no need to go in depth. I want an answer within half an hour. Did that bastard Eden Swan cause you trouble?" Kingsley gnashed his teeth. "Nothing I can't manage. That bastard will suffer retribution sooner or later. In due time." Jean Lawrence said. "Wait for my reply. I'll find out if Cameron Hall and Eden Swan are related. Thanks." As Jean Lawrence hung up, the phone rang again. Jean Lawrence looked at the caller ID and answered, "Dad. I told you to come to my office the moment you came back. What are you doing?" Alexander Lawrence's furious voice came from the other end. Jean Lawrence remained unmoved. "I have some matters on hand. I'll come once I'm done." Jean Lawrence. "Do you know that in the workplace, you have to obey the orders of your superiors?" Jean sneered. She finally knew about the so-called workplace mistreatment often talked about in Harkin. It was these so-called leaders who had a strong sense of superiority. They thought themselves superior to others and were the only ones who mattered in the company. They acted like kings of olden days and that everyone had to obey their orders. To do otherwise would be treason. She said, "I'll come up to you when I'm done." And Jean hung up. Alexander Lawrence held his phone, fuming. At this moment, Joshua Lawrence was in Alexander's office. He took the opportunity to sow discord. "Dad, I can't believe my sister doesn't respect you." Alexander suppressed his anger. "She took the liberty to change our investment amount today. Even if it was a favorable outcome, it was still something she acted on her own. She didn't even inform you, nor has she taken the initiative to explain to you. Dad, don't you think that's too much? Does she think she owns Lawrence Enterprise and that she can do whatever she wants? She must think highly of herself." "Enough." Alexander snapped at Joshua. "Cut the crap. You're one to speak." Joshua was embarrassed by Alexander's sudden outburst. He said, "Dad, I'm only 23 years old. It's only been a year since I graduated from university. Most of my peers are still fooling around. How can you say that? And Jean's only 25 years old. Why didn't you mention that? Eden Swan's only 25 years old, yet he's in charge of the Swanhaven Bank. Why don't you think about how Edward Swan, who's only 23 years old, is in charge of the Swan family matters? You're 23 years old. Aside from playing games and pretending to work in the company, what else can you do?" Alexander directed his anger at Joshua. Joshua was not pleased to be scolded. He could not help but say, "I take after you, Joshua Lawrence." Alexander was even angrier now. Joshua trembled in fear. Fortunately, someone knocked on the door. Alexander suppressed his anger and said fiercely, "Come in." Jean pushed the door open and entered. Joshua let out a small sigh of relief. With Alexander being this angry, Jean was in for a good scolding. Joshua looked forward to seeing her make a fool of herself. Jean felt Alexander's anger the moment she entered. However, she acted dumb and said in an amicable manner, "Dad. Call me general manager in the office." Alexander Lawrence put on airs. "Understood." Jean nodded. "How did it go?" Alexander Lawrence looked serious. "I wanted to report this to you privately." Jean Lawrence picked up the contract in her hand. "I went to MUK today to discuss the proposal, but at the last minute, I changed the investment amount." Jean Lawrence, who do you think you are? What right do you have to change the company's investment amount? Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you're my daughter? Do you know that the investment amount is the decision from the board of directors? If you change it without permission, the proposal is invalidated. Alexander Lawrence was furious. Chapter 96. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A Small Victory Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Forrest Jackson was stunned. He clearly remembered that when they decided on the proposal, it was 2 billion yuan. He thought that they would definitely lose, so he did not expect it to turn around like this. The reversal was extremely satisfying. None of Cameron Hall's arrogance remained when he left. It was the first time Forrest felt overjoyed at having witnessed such a scene. It was a slap in Cameron's face. Forrest followed Jean into the car. He could not help but ask, when did team leader Lawrence change the investment amount? Before I came here. Did you know that our proposal was stolen? It was obvious that Cameron Hall had copied their proposal. Who the hell would believe Cameron Hall's lies? It was just a hunch, Jean Lawrence said indifferently. When Cameron Hall left, the grown man had almost cried. By the way, is there a mole in our project team? I believe so. Who is it? I don't know yet. But I'll find out sooner or later. But why did they give the proposal to Cameron Hall? Cameron Hall owns a small company. How could he have the guts to go toe-to-toe with Lawrence Enterprise? No matter how bad the Lawrence Enterprises financials have been in recent years, it was still one of the 12 family enterprises in Harken. There was a huge gap between its status and assets compared to an ordinary enterprise. Someone must be backing him, of course. Who? Forrest Jackson asked nervously. It's someone who doesn't want me to do well in the company. She knew this person very well. Forrest Jackson thought about it and blurted out, could it be Deputy Director Lawrence? Yes. Jean Lawrence gave an affirmative answer. Forrest Jackson was her first confidant. There was no need for her to hide anything from him. What the F***ck? Forrest Jackson could not help but exclaim, isn't the Lawrence Enterprise your family's business? Deputy Director Lawrence actually used such despicable means to oust you. If it really succeeds, how much money will Lawrence Enterprise have lost? Jean sneered. Joshua was indeed that stupid. However, based on my understanding of Deputy Director Lawrence, he doesn't seem to have access to external resources. Plus, he doesn't know how to socialize. It's impossible for him to have known someone like Cameron Hall. Forrest Jackson was puzzled. Jean smiled again. There was someone backing Joshua Lawrence. That person was most likely Eden Swan. She wondered if she was blind to have fallen in love with such a dark and vengeful man. After Cameron Hall left West's hotel, he hurriedly called Eden Swan. Eden Swan tightened his grip on his phone, his expression turned dark. How did he fail? He gritted his teeth. I told you to record the entire negotiation process. Did you? Yes, Mr. Swan. I'll send it to you now, Cameron Hall said hurriedly. Eden Swan hung up. He had never thought that this matter would fail. He only had Cameron Hall record the meeting as he was afraid that Jean Lawrence and West would pull something underhanded behind the scenes. If there was, he would release the recording. He also wanted to hear Jean Lawrence break down with his own ears. In fact, he even imagined how happy he would be. He gritted his teeth and clicked on the recording and listened to the recorded conversation. Everything Cameron Hall did was according to his request. There was no mistake. The negotiation process was not a failure, nor was there any underhanded manipulation. In the end, it was only because of the investment amount. 2 billion yuan. How did it suddenly become 2 billion yuan? Had he been fooled by Jean Lawrence? He could not accept it. Chapter 97. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Counter Scheme Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless fantasy translation, I know, Jean replied. You knew, and yet in order for a successful negotiation, I think it's acceptable to make necessary changes. Or do you think it's more important to abide by the company's rules and lose out on the contract? Stop trying to change the subject. Why didn't you report to me when you changed the contract? Instead, you made the decision on your own. It was an emergency. So I didn't have time to report it. It's also to prevent anyone from tampering with it. What do you mean? When I went to the meeting today, Ascension Technologies' proposal was almost the same as ours, and the investment amount was just 100 million yuan more than ours. It's impossible for this to be a coincidence. Someone must have leaked it. Alexander's expression changed drastically. That's right, our company has a spy. As she said that, she glanced at Joshua. Joshua's heart skipped a beat. His body trembled slightly. But since I don't have any evidence, I can't confirm who it is for now, Jean Lawrence said bluntly. You must find out. Alexander ordered. I will, Jean agreed. But even so, you could have given me a call to report. How am I going to answer to the board of directors when you increase the investment amount by 200 million yuan? Alexander Lawrence was still very angry. We won't be the ones paying for the additional 200 million, Jean said calmly. Alexander frowned. Joshua retorted, are you going to pay for it yourself? Do you have money? Jean shot Joshua a sidelong glance. She did not think much of him. She said, Swanhaven Bank. Who do you think you are? Joshua was agitated, even more than before. Joshua Lawrence, are you targeting me at every turn? It feels like you're colluding with outsiders in order to make things difficult for me. What nonsense are you spouting? The contract has just been negotiated with MUK and it hasn't been announced to the public yet. How did you know that I've changed the investment amount on the proposal? Don't you think your actions are very suspicious? I have a personal relationship with the boss of Ascension Technology. He came to congratulate Lawrence Enterprise immediately. I just found out, a personal relationship. Is it because of you that my proposal was so similar to his? Jean Lawrence, enough. Alexander turned to Joshua. Shut up. Joshua really wanted to strangle Jean. Alexander did not think Joshua would do such a thing. He turned to Jean. So, how do we get Swanhaven Bank to pay Ednel.co? Jean smiled. After all, Alexander had been in business for many, many years. He still had foresight when it came to profits. She said, when Jasmine and Eden get married, Eden will be the son.in.law of the Lawrences. Should Lawrence Enterprise face financial difficulties, Swanhaven Bank would not refuse to give us a loan. What about paying off the loan? Besides, the interest is high. Joshua Lawrence could help but add. Swanhaven Bank has a 3-year interest waiver policy. Although it's targeted at welfare enterprises, it won't be hard to find a way to get Eden to approve that policy for Lawrence Enterprise. Once we repaid the loan in 3 years, the E.Commerce project would have made a profit. You wish. Joshua mocked. You're asking the Swans to provide you with free capital to invest and make money. Do you think that the Swans is stupid enough to make such a loss? Jean Lawrence smiled. In terms of business, it's a loss for the Swans to invest 200 million on our behalf. But in the end, Eden Swan will be the son.in.law of the Lawrences. From a relational standpoint, Eden Swan wouldn't refuse. That's just plotting against brother.in.law. Joshua Lawrence said fiercely. Kingsley had just told Jean that Ascension Technology had some business dealings with Swan Enterprise. With that, she was absolutely certain that the person backing Joshua was Eden Swan. Every injustice has its perpetrator, every debt has its debtor. Since Eden Swan was the one who made her to fork out the additional 200 million, he should be the one to fund it. She pondered, how does Eden Swan feel about shooting himself in the foot? Chapter 98. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The annoying Fourth Master Swan Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation in the CEO's office of Lawrence Enterprise. What kind of scheme is this? Jean kept quiet as Alexander said, I've already married my daughter to him. Why can't he provide our family some support? I'm just worried that Brother.in.law will refuse. It won't be good if it affects our relationship. Joshua hurriedly explained. That will depend on Jasmine, Jean said. She pushed the responsibility onto Jasmine. If Jasmine played her role well, then great. Otherwise, she would be deemed useless. Why did you drag Jasmine into, that's enough? Alexander interrupted Joshua and said. I know how to resolve this matter. General Manager, regarding the matter with Swanhaven Bank, I hope that our plans won't be made known in advance. If Eden Swan learns of our plans, he would come up with excuses to reject us. It's not that I doubt Eden's character, but we must remain wary. Of course. I'm not that stupid, Alexander said disdainfully. I'm not doubting you, Dad. I'm just afraid. Jean glanced at Joshua. Joshua's expression immediately changed. What do you mean? Do you think I'll report this? I didn't say anything. Jean shrugged and smiled. Joshua was furious. Alexander snapped at Joshua, Joshua Lawrence, you'd better behave yourself. If you tell anyone about this, I'll break your legs and make sure you never step foot into the Lawrence Enterprise again. Joshua could only grit his teeth and nod. That's all. You're dismissed, Alexander ordered. Understood. Jean and Joshua walked out of Alexander's office. The two of them entered the elevator. What Dad just said was not a joke, Jean reminded as she pressed the button. Joshua glared at her. What do you mean? I'm afraid you didn't understand, so I'll repeat myself. Jean enunciated each word clearly. Don't leak the plan. We're the only people who know that we'll get Swanhaven Bank to give us an interest-free loan. Dad and I definitely won't tell anyone else. You're the only one. Jean Lawrence. Joshua was furious. You'll regret it if you were kicked out of the Lawrence Enterprise. Are you mocking me on purpose? Think what you will. Jean smiled at Joshua. The elevator arrived and Jean walked out first. Joshua punched the elevator door angrily. He really wanted to strangle Jean. Why didn't his father beat this woman to death back then? What right did she have to show off in front of him? He was the real grandson and only heir of the Lawrences. What right did Jean have to flaunt in front of him? He must kill her. He must. After Jean and Joshua left, Alexander also left the office and returned to the Lawrences' residence. Alexander reported everything to Jonathan. He was already used to relying on his father for such matters. Jonathan Lawrence replied without hesitation, do as Jean says. Does that mean that the Swans will fund the additional 200 million yuan? Isn't this why we married Jasmine to the Swans? Jonathan said straightforwardly. What's the point if we can't get any benefits from such a marriage? I'm worried that we might offend the Swans if Eden is unhappy. That'll depend on Jasmine. If she can please the Swans, they won't be offended. But it's a business matter, your biggest flaw is your lack of courage and decisiveness. Jean is so determined, yet you're still so timid. Alex, you've disappointed me. Jonathan said. All right, Dad. I'll do as you say. Alexander Lawrence did not say anything more. He was unwilling to admit that he was not capable enough. As we've seen through this contract negotiation, Jean is very capable. Make good use of her and the Lawrence Enterprise will prosper, Jonathan Lawrence said in a serious tone. You should have learned from the incident with Jean's mother. You have to hold on to Lawrence Enterprise. Don't worry. In the past, I was negligent towards Jean's mother. I've learned from my mistakes. I will never make the same mistake with Jean. Jonathan nodded but didn't forget to remind him. Let Joshua learn from Jean in secret. I will. Alexander left Jonathan's room and headed back to his room. At that moment, Jennifer Fabian was doing yoga in her room. When she saw him, she quickly stood up. Alex, why are you home so early today? Call Jasmine and ask her and Eden to come over for dinner tonight. Why did you suddenly ask for them to come over? Jennifer was surprised. Don't ask about anything else. Get the kitchen to prepare more food. Okay. Jennifer did not ask further. She hurriedly called Jasmine. After a while, Jasmine replied that Eden had agreed and that they would come straight after work. At 6 p.m. Eden and Jasmine appeared at the Lawrences' main courtyard. Jean received Alexander's message and got off work on time. The moment she returned, she bumped into Eden and Jasmine. Jasmine pretended to be friendly and called out to Jean, "Sister, you're back. You guys are here too. Mom called me and Eden to come back for dinner. She said Dad missed us," Jasmine said deliberately. She was deliberately showing off Alexander's love for her. Jean smiled. You'll know what Alexander is thinking soon. Jean said, "Help yourselves. I'll head back to my room." Then she went upstairs. Eden looked at Jean's back coldly. It was not an illusion. Ever since she returned from overseas, Jean had never looked him in the eye. It was the same at this moment. He gritted his teeth. Don't think that you can really show off just because you're doing slightly better than me. One day, he would make her regret her actions. Eden. Eden Swan returned to his senses. Why do you keep looking at Jean? Jasmine Lawrence said anxiously. What are you saying? Eden's tone was slightly displeased. If I had any thoughts of her still, would I be marrying you? I can't stand her disrespecting you. Eden made up an excuse. I'm thinking how I should teach her a lesson. When Jasmine heard Eden's words, she immediately broke into a smile. I knew you definitely wouldn't like Jean. She's slept with countless men while she was overseas. She's just a dirty wh*re. That bastard George probably doesn't even know who she's been with. Enough. Eden interrupted her. Don't let your father hear you talking about Jean like that. It'll ruin your image. Okay. Jasmine held Eden's hand obediently and walked into the main hall. Eden suddenly felt annoyed by Jasmine's intimacy. There was a period of time when he really enjoyed all sorts of admiration and flattery from Jasmine. It gave him a sense of achievement as a man. It wasn't like back then, when he was still with Jean Lawrence, where he was always the one giving in to her. At this moment, he felt a little tired of it all. He hid his emotions and walked in with Jasmine. Jean returned to her room. George was using the computer in the room. When he saw Jean, he quickly closed the screen. Jean Lawrence paid no attention to it. She said, "Wash your hands and prepare to go downstairs for dinner." Okay. George climbed off the computer chair and went to the bathroom. Jean looked at George's small figure and got up to follow him. As she watched George wash his hands, she said, "Miles is coming to Southampton. What's he here for?" "To be your designated driver." "Why?" George looked confused. "I need to work, so I'll be busy most of the time." "I don't feel comfortable leaving you alone," Jean said. "The kidnapping by Fourth Master Swan will never happen again." "He didn't kidnap me," George explained. "I volunteered to go with him." Jean frowned. "A few of the older boys bullied me. He saved me. I didn't tell you that because I didn't want you to develop a fondness for Fourth Master Swan." George blushed as he spoke. "Who bullied you?" Jean's eyes narrowed. In an instant, the atmosphere changed. Fourth Master Swan has already taught them a lesson. Those guys who bullied me before are now my underlings. Actually, Fourth Master Swan isn't that annoying, George said softly. Jean's eyes flickered slightly. Once in a while. He wasn't annoying. But that's if he doesn't take you away. George looked at Jean and suddenly said angrily, he told me that you're his and he's only lent you to me. Jean was stunned. In fact, her heart skipped a beat. So he's still annoying. Very annoying, George concluded. Jean smiled. It was only occasionally that her heart would skip a beat. But most times, he was still annoying. Chapter 99. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Successful Counterattack, Inciting Conflict Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation at the Lawrence's restaurant. Everyone gathered around the luxurious table for dinner. Jasmine seemed to be putting effort into it. She acted like a family pet, warming up to Alexander, Jennifer, and Eden. In reality, everything she did was on purpose. It was to make Jean jealous. Of course, Jean wasn't jealous. She even thought that Jasmine was stupid. Hence, she ate dinner with her son calmly and ignored Jasmine. In Jasmine's eyes, she was sure that Jean was acting cold on purpose. In fact, Jean must be jealous of everything she had now. Not only her status in the Lawrences, but also her love with Eden. Jasmine felt a little smug. At the dining table, Alexander suddenly said, Eden, how have you been doing after taking over Swanhaven Bank? It's been good, Eden replied. It was a little tricky at first, but I've gotten the hang of it. That's good. Alexander nodded. Young people should prioritize their careers. Yes. Eden said respectfully. To outsiders, Eden Swan was an ambitious, polite, humble, and hard-working person. He would make others think that he was very well-mannered. Among the arrogant and conceited young heirs in the upper-class society, he was as refreshing as spring water and was highly regarded by the elders. Eat more. Alexander said to Eden. Thanks, Dad. The two of them chatted casually. It seemed unusually harmonious. Jasmine glanced at Jean from time to time, her eyes smug. Jean pretended not to notice. Some people were born stupid. After dinner, Alexander asked Eden to have tea with him in the tea room. Jasmine accompanied Eden affectionately. What made Jasmine unhappy was that Alexander also called Jean. Naturally, Joshua was there as well. Alexander took a sip of tea and finally went straight to the point. Eden, do you know that the Lawrence Enterprise has been negotiating with MUK? I've heard of it, Eden replied. But because the Swans had no plans to invest in the external businesses, I don't know much about it. Alexander Lawrence nodded. The Swan Enterprise already owns many businesses. If the group expands further, there would be imbalances in the market. Yes, that's why we at Swan Enterprise hasn't had much contact with other companies. Eden, I won't beat around the bush. I need your help with something, please go ahead, Dad. Although he appeared enthusiastic, Eden was already planning his answer. Alexander sighed and looked a little solemn. He said, I won't hide it from you. The Lawrence Enterprise and MUK have agreed on a contract today. That's a good thing. Congratulations, Dad. Eden knew how to flatter someone. I heard that many in MUK wanted to collaborate with us. Now that they have chosen Lawrence Enterprise, it proves that our company is better than the competition. Jasmine quickly flattered. Jean was the one who secured it. Jasmine's expression changed visibly. She turned and glared at Jean, who was sipping her tea calmly. Jasmine gritted her teeth, unhappy. The contract has been negotiated, but Lawrence Enterprise is short on funds. Eden, you should know that the Lawrence Enterprise has invested a lot in this period of time for our restructuring. In a situation where funding is already very difficult, we have resorted to using our reserve funds to negotiate the contract with MUK. However, because of something that came up at the last minute, the original investment amount increased by 200 million yuan. 200 million is not a lot, but at this critical juncture, it has stumped me. Dad, do you mean you want to take a loan from Swanhaven Bank? Eden was smart to begin with. Moreover, Alexander had already made it so clear, so he couldn't play dumb. However, he felt a little uncomfortable. Eden was already unhappy that he did not get this project, and now Alexander was asking him for help. That's right. Alexander Lawrence nodded. I will get the staff to come to Lawrence Enterprise tomorrow to do the calculations for the loan. I will try my best to settle the loan amount of 200 million yuan. As for the interest, I will do my best to give you the best rates. Eden Swan had his poker face on. Eden, Alexander said. I heard that Swanhaven Bank has a 3-year, interest-free loan. Eden's expression changed slightly. Give me the 3-year loan, Alexander said matter-of-factly. Chapter 100. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Successful counterattack, inciting conflict. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, Dad, that is only for welfare companies. To put it bluntly, it's for public welfare. There are rules and regulations within Swanhaven Bank. Ordinary companies, I know. That's why I just told you to do me a favor. That's so I don't have to waste time. Eden Swan pursed his lips. Alexander Lawrence's rebuttal meant that he won't take no for an answer. Or is Fourth Master Swan still the one calling the shots at Swanhaven Bank? Should I go look for him instead? Alexander saw that Eden didn't agree, so he said that deliberately. That's not it. My fourth uncle has already handed over all aspects of the management of Swanhaven Bank to me. He basically doesn't oversee the management anymore. Of course, that would be best if you could make the decision. Alexander appeared to be a little intimidating. I need the funds urgently as I have to sign the final contract with MUK in the next 2 days. Within 2 days, I hope you can approve and transfer the funds to us. Eden gritted his teeth. He was holding it in as he could neither agree nor disagree. I know of your capability, so I'll leave this matter to you. Alexander stood up and patted Eden, appearing sincere and earnest. Eden braced himself. I'll do my best. Alexander nodded slightly. It's getting late. You guys should head back early. Everyone has work tomorrow. All right. Alexander left after saying that. Eden suppressed his anger. He turned to look at Joshua Lawrence. Joshua's eyes flickered. However, as he was threatened by Jean Lawrence, he did not dare to leak any information. He quickly found an excuse and left too. Jean, on the other hand, was leisurely sipping tea in the tea room with a calm appearance. She said casually, the thought never occurred to you that the extra 200 million yuan would be on you. It was your idea, wasn't it? Eden was certain it was her doing. Jean glanced at Eden. If I say it was Joshua's idea, would you die of anger? Jean Lawrence. Eden was furious. Jean stood up from the tea chair and stretched herself. She yawned and said, Eldest young Master Swan, I've said before that evil doing brings about karma. How does it feel to shoot yourself in the foot? I imagine it must not be pleasant. Don't you get cocky in front of me. It's getting late. I'll head back to my room to rest now. I won't disturb the two of you any longer. Jean ignored them and left. Eden gritted his teeth and suppressed his anger. He had been tricked by Jean. He hadn't even thought that Jean would stage such a powerful counterattack that he was caught off guard. It was a heavy blow without any warning. Eden, what did Jean do? Shut up. Eden was in a rage. The moment Jasmine spoke, he was furious. Jasmine felt aggrieved and her eyes turned red. She looked pitiful. In the past, Eden would coax her whenever she cried. Now, Eden looked at her as she cried. He became even more impatient. Eden said, "What else can you do besides cry?" Jasmine looked at him with wide eyes. "You can't help me at all. You're only a burden to me. You allowed your family to put this on me. How useless." Eden said fiercely, and he ignored her and strode away. Jasmine looked at Eden in disbelief. She had never been scolded like this by Eden. He had always said that she was gentle, considerate, and 100 times better than Jean Lawrence. Now, he suddenly said that she was useless. No, it wasn't Eden's fault. It was Jean. She was the one who had schemed against Eden. It was that BTCH who had hurt their relationship. Jean Lawrence must experience a horrible death. Jean returned to her room and the light was on. As George had to go to school, he had developed the habit of sleeping and waking up early. Around 9 in the evening, George had already fallen asleep on the bed. Sometimes, Jean felt really grateful to God for giving her such a son that made her heart warm. She tried not to make any noise as she took a shower in the bathroom. After washing up, she picked up her phone and casually glanced at it. She saw countless missed calls from Monica Cardellini on the screen. Jean pursed her lips. She wrapped herself in a towel and went straight to the balcony and dialed. "Hey Monica." "Jean, I'm going crazy." Monica Cardellini broke down. Jean heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing that Monica had called her so many times, Jean was worried that something had happened to her. Now that she's heard Monica's agitated voice, she concluded that it was nothing serious.